So imagine a single word that describes a judge handing down a death sentence, the architectural blueprints of a house, and, the way you habitually drink your morning coffee.
Right, which sounds completely impossible to our modern ears.
Yeah, it really does. Welcome to Reform Thinking, by the way. Today we are looking at well, a linguistic anomaly.
A massive one.
For sure. Usually when you sit down to study biblical theology or ethics, you might pick up a massive volume of systematic theology.
Hmm?
Or you read through sweeping historical narratives.
You look at big events to try and understand big ideas.
Spot on. But we are taking a completely different approach for this deep dive. We are looking at a huge stack of lexical sources, dictionaries, and linguistic data focused entirely on one single Hebrew word.
And that word is mishpat.
Right. Now, you might wonder why we are dedicating an entire deep dive to just one word.
It seems like a very narrow focus at first glance.
It does, but the answer becomes obvious when you look at the sheer volume of data in front of us. I mean, this word appears 425 times in the Old Testament.
Which is staggering.
It is. It acts as a master key. If you want to understand the biblical view of law, societal rights, and the very character of God himself, you have to understand this word.
You really do, because it touches everything from the highest courts of heaven all the way down to the most mundane aspects of daily life.
Yeah, and it totally exposes how our modern minds incorrectly compartmentalize reality.
And the way our modern minds slice up reality is, well, it's the perfect place to start. Because the ancient Hebrew mind simply did not operate that way.
No, they saw things much more holistically.
Precisely. For this conversation, we are going to trace the trajectory of mishpat through 5 distinct applications we found in our lexical sources.
Okay, lay out the roadmap for us.
Sure. So we will start in the local courtroom to grasp its root meaning, then move to the moral character of the judge presiding over that court.
Makes sense.
From there, we will look at how that moral standard becomes codified into divine religion, how those laws establish the rights of the vulnerable, and finally, and this is the wildest part, how this legal term somehow morphs into the word for physical measurements and daily customs.
I am still blown away by that last part.
It is fascinating. By following this path, you will see a comprehensive vision of total cosmic order.
Yeah, a worldview that absolutely refuses to separate the secular from the sacred, or, the legal from the moral.
Right. So let us start right at the baseline, down in the dirt of the ancient Near East.
Okay, looking at our linguistic data, the sources trace mishpai back to its root consonant structure, which is ship.
And that root translates simply as to judge.
Yeah. But as you read through the data, you quickly realize this noun does not just refer to the abstract philosophical concept of justice.
Not at all. It is very concrete.
Extremely concrete. It encompasses the entire legal apparatus of the ancient world. When you see this word in the text, it could be referring to the actual act of deciding a case.
Or it could mean the physical court itself.
Yes, like in Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 1, it talks about people coming to the place of judgment.
The actual physical location where disputes are settled.
Right. It refers to the lawsuit or the litigation process itself, too. And it frequently refers to the final sentence handed down by a magistrate.
Like the phrase mishpat mawat.
Yeah, the sources highlight that one heavily, which translates to a sentence of death, seen in passages like Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 6.
Think about the mechanics of the ancient legal system compared to ours.
It is a completely different world.
It really is. In our modern context, the legal system is highly compartmentalized. You have a judge, you have a courthouse, you have a trial, you have lawyers, a jury, and a verdict.
Right, all separate things.
Precisely. Those are entirely separate entities with their own distinct vocabulary. You never use the same word to describe the brick building downtown and the 20-year prison sentence handed down inside it.
That would just sound like nonsense in English.
It would. But for the ancient Hebrew mind, the word mishpat absorbs all of those elements into a single unified concept.
It is like a linguistic Swiss Army knife.
That is a great way to put it. If you are examining a dispute between two parties in an ancient Israelite city gate, which is where they held court, the entire phenomenon is encapsulated by this one term.
From the moment they walk in to the final gavel strike.
Right. From the moment the accuser and the accused walk into the tribunal, to the arguments they make, to the moment the elder pronounces the verdict.
The sources even note the term Baal Mishpat.
Yes, which translates literally to a master of the lawsuit or a legal adversary.
It describes someone who has a cause or a dispute with you. So the entire relational conflict, the physical space, and the outcome are all wrapped up in one linguistic package.
It's a very dense word.
I want to make sure you catch the scale of what is happening here as you're listening. To use a modern analogy, it is as if the physical courthouse, the closing arguments of the defense attorney, the strike of the judge's gavel, and the resulting penalty are all just rolled into one single term.
It is an all-encompassing word for the entire judicial event.
And what strikes me about the sources is how weighty this event is. This is not a casual mediation between two guys arguing over a scratched chariot.
Oh, absolutely not. The gravity of the situation is undeniable in the text.
Show us where we see that gravity.
The sources point us to a very specific phrase, bo bamishat, which means coming before the court, or bringing someone into judgment.
We see that in Job, right?
Yes, we see this phrase utilized in Job chapter 9, verse 32, and Psalm 143, verse 2. When the text uses the phrase bo bamishat, it signifies a formal, high-stakes rendering of a verdict.
It is an official process.
Very official. It is a process where evidence is weighed, witnesses are heard, and a binding, authoritative decision is decreed by a governing official.
And the outcome of this process alters the reality of the people involved permanently.
Without a doubt. In the case of Mishpat, the death sentence, it literally determines whether someone continues to breathe.
That is as high stakes as it gets.
It is.
Yeah.
The absolute seriousness of this legal proceeding, where truth is established and consequences are enforced, sets the stage for how the biblical text talks about ultimate reality.
Okay, wait, but how does a mechanical legal ruling become a standard for actual goodness?
That is the big question.
Right, because I want to challenge this idea for a second. This is where the translation can feel incredibly jarring to a modern reader.
How so?
Well, if mishpat means a legal decision or a court proceeding, how does it suddenly become a virtue?
Ah, I see what you mean.
Because in our world, a legal ruling can be completely unjust. We see judges hand down biased verdicts all the time.
Every single day.
Right. A court decision is not inherently virtuous. Sometimes it is the result of a bribe or a prejudiced jury. A terrible, tyrannical ruler can execute a perfectly legal sentence that is entirely evil.
That is a very valid point.
So how does the ancient Hebrew mind reconcile the mechanical process of law with objective moral rectitude? Why use the word for a lawsuit to describe the highest moral standard?
Well, answering that requires us to look through a Reformed theological lens.
Okay, let's go there.
In Reformed theology, particularly when we look at the framework of the Westminster Confession, we understand that God's attributes are not separate from his being.
Right, the doctrine of divine simplicity.
Precisely. He is not held to an external standard of justice that exists outside of himself.
He is the standard.
He is. For the Creator, there is absolutely no separation between his legal rulings and perfect moral fairness. God is the ultimate shupi, the ultimate judge.
So his ruling defines what is fair.
Yes. Therefore, his mishpah, his decision, is the objective standard of reality. Earthly courts fail because the human judge is flawed, tainted by sin, and limited in knowledge.
But when the judge of all the earth makes a ruling,
that ruling is the very definition of what is good, right, and flawless. The sources demonstrate that mishpah moves beyond a procedural term and becomes the moral attribute of justice itself.
the text actually cites Genesis for this, doesn't it?
It does. Genesis chapter 18, verse 25. Shall not the judge of all the earth do mishpah?
That is Abraham pleading with God about Sodom.
That is right. In this context, Abraham is appealing to the intrinsic nature of God. The word signifies absolute moral fairness because it is rooted in the character of the one who defines fairness.
That makes a lot of sense. The local human judge is just a pale, often broken imitation of the true standard.
A very broken imitation.
So when humans are commanded to do mishpah, as we see Micah chapter 6, verse 8, they are not just being told to follow local administrative rules or hold extra court sessions.
No, they are being told to reflect something divine.
They are acting as mirrors.
Spot on. When humans are told to do mishpah, they are being asked to mirror God's perfect moral character in their own spheres of influence.
Which is a massive responsibility.
It is a staggering responsibility. The text tells us in Psalm 37, verse 28, that God loves justice, and in Job chapter 8, verse 3, that God will never pervert it.
So the word has moved from describing a legal mechanism to describing an objective moral virtue.
Yes. The sources frequently contrast this true justice with the perversion of justice.
What does a perversion of justice look like in this context?
To pervert mishpah in an earthly court involves bias, bribery, and deception. It involves looking at the wealthy landowner and giving him preferential treatment over the poor laborer.
Something we still see today, sadly.
We do. But because God's character is entirely free of such corruption, human beings are commanded to align their behavior, their decisions, and their societal structures with his flawless standard.
So true justice is the reflection of God's own rectitude within human society.
That is right. It is the application of his moral perfection to human relationships.
Okay, so because God's moral character is the flawless standard, his specific rulings are not just isolated, one-off decisions that apply to a single ancient dispute and then vanish.
No, they carry permanent weight.
Right. When the judge of all the earth rules on a matter, that ruling establishes the permanent parameters for his people. It reveals what is permanently right.
It sets the precedent for all time.
Yeah, think about how modern Supreme Court case law operates in our judicial systems today.
That is a very helpful comparison.
So the Supreme Court takes up a specific dispute between two parties. The justices make a ruling on that isolated case. But because it is the highest court in the land, that single verdict becomes the binding rule for all future generations in similar situations.
The localized ruling becomes a universal statute.
Precisely. The biblical use of mishpat functions in a similar way, but on a cosmic scale. God's perfect character applied to a specific human situation becomes a standing ordinance for all of his people.
And the lexical entries verify this evolution extensively.
What do the dictionaries say about this shift?
While the sources show mishpat is frequently used to mean laws, regulations, and prescriptions, it is very often paired with the Hebrew word ik, which means statute, or Torah, which means instruction.
It gets grouped with other legal terms.
It does, and the grammatical shift to the plural forms in the Hebrew text really underscores this reality. We see the plural form, hamishpatim, used to refer to an entire body of codified laws.
Like a whole legal code.
Yes. A primary example is the Book of the Covenant in Exodus chapter 21, verse 1.
Ah, right after the Ten Commandments.
That is the one. It begins by laying out the mishpatim that Moses is to set before the people. The sources also list phrases like mishtaya Yahweh, the judgments of the Lord.
So these plural forms denote specific codified regulations.
Yes, regulations governing everything from property disputes to physical injury.
And in a reformed framework, we have to recognize what these laws actually represent.
They're not arbitrary.
No, they are not arbitrary rules designed by a distant, grumpy deity to restrict human joy. That is such a common misconception.
It really is.
They are the codified specifications of God's justice. They are the written expression of his moral character translated into daily human action.
That is the core theological reality here. To reject these ordinances is to reject the divine religion itself, because these laws map out the exact way to live in alignment with the Creator's design.
You cannot separate the rules from the ruler.
You cannot. The law is simply the reflection of the lawgiver. This is why in the book of Isaiah, chapter 42, verses 1 and 4, the term is equated with divine religion itself.
Wow, the word for a lawsuit becomes synonymous with religion.
It does. The prophet speaks of the servant of the Lord who will bring forth mishpat to the nations, and the coastlands will wait for his law.
So the religion of Israel was not merely, it was not just a set of internal feelings or private spiritual meditations.
It was highly practical.
It was the visible, tangible application of God's justice in the material world.
That is exactly the point.
Okay, so if God's laws map out perfect fairness and reflect his flawless character, then they must specify what is rightfully owed to every individual within a society.
They have to. A perfect law leaves no one out.
Right. A massive part of this codified law dictates how people interact with one another. We're talking about property, inheritance, social obligations, and economic structures.
All the real-world stuff.
Yeah. If the law is perfect, it leaves no one out, especially the most vulnerable members of society. And the texts reveal a fascinating dimension here.
Which dimension is that?
Well, mishpat frequently translates to a legal claim, a privilege, or a due.
Yes, the sources provide several concrete examples of this usage.
Give us a few.
It outlines the right of the firstborn in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17.
So that dictates what a son is legally owed from an inheritance.
Right. It details the right of redemption for property in Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 7, establishing the legal protocol for keeping ancestral land within a family.
Okay.
It also specifies the due of the priests, what they are owed from the sacrifices for their sustenance, in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 3.
So in all these cases, mishpat is not about punishing wrongdoing.
No, it is about securing a rightful claim.
I need to interject here because this feels like a massive paradigm shift.
It is a big shift for modern readers.
It really is. When we hear the word judgment today, we almost exclusively picture a criminal being punished.
We picture a courtroom and a gavel.
Right, we picture a prison sentence, a fine, or a consequence for breaking the rules. But here, the sources are showing us that mishpat sounds like an entitlement.
It does.
It sounds like a human right or a societal guarantee. Is the biblical concept of justice more about protecting the weak than punishing the bad guys?
It is not an either-or proposition. It requires us to synthesize the dual nature of the word.
Okay, break that down for us.
Yes, the term absolutely involves the execution of punishment. The sources point to Jeremiah chapter 48, verse 47, which speaks of the mishpat, the judgment, executed upon the nation of Moab for their wickedness.
So God does punish evil.
God's wrath against sin, his active punishment of rebellion, is a real and terrifying aspect of his justice. He does not leave the guilty unpunished.
Okay, so the punitive side is definitely there.
It is there, but justice is equally defined by delivering what is legally and morally owed to those who cannot secure it for themselves.
The people who have no power to fight for their own rights.
Spot on. The sources heavily emphasize that mishpat is the word used to outline the right of the orphan, the widow, and the poor.
We see that in texts like Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 18.
Yes, and Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 28.
And this is where the doctrine of total depravity becomes incredibly relevant to understanding the legal code.
It is the crucial context. In Reformed thought, we must factor in the total depravity of man.
Because human nature is thoroughly corrupted by sin.
Thoroughly. Every faculty of the human heart and mind is tainted by selfishness. Left to their own devices, societies will naturally exploit the weak.
The powerful will rewrite the rules to benefit themselves.
They always do. They will naturally strip the vulnerable of their mishpat, their rightful claim to provision and protection.
Therefore, God's law fiercely protects them.
It stands as a shield. Defending the widow and the orphan is not just an act of optional charity or extra credit morality.
It's not just being nice.
No, it is the execution of cosmic justice. It is demanding that they receive what the judge of all the earth says they are owed.
Right.
To wrest right, or to provoke justice, as condemned in Exodus chapter 23, verse 6, means to actively deny a marginalized person their rightful due.
It means looking at the person who has no social power and deciding their rights do not matter.
That is the essence of perverting justice.
So if a society ignores the poor, they are not just lacking compassion. They are actively violating the structural integrity of God's legal order.
They are denying people their mishpat.
That pervasive sense of order, ensuring everything and everyone receives their proper due according to God's standard, extends even beyond social ethics and morality.
It goes into areas you would never expect.
It spills over into the physical structure of reality itself. And this is what leads to the most surprising definitions we found in these lexical sources.
The physical measurements.
Yeah. The final phase of our investigation reveals how this word permeates every layer of existence, moving from the courtroom to the moral character of God, to the law, to human rights, and finally into architecture and daily habits.
The sources list mishpat as a plan or a measure for physical buildings.
This still blows my mind.
In Exodus chapter 26, verse 30, Moses is commanded to erect the tabernacle according to its mishpat, its specific blueprint shown to him on the mountain.
He is not just given general guidelines.
No, he is given precise, authoritative measurements. In 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 38, the text says the Temple of Solomon is finished in all its parts and according to all its mishpan, its architectural specifications.
And it goes even further than buildings, right?
It does. Furthermore, the word is used to describe customs, manners, or a mode of life.
Like the way people live day to day.
Yes. We see the custom of the priests in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 13, detailing how they habitually operated. We see the manner or religious practice of the nations in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 33.
You have to sit with this anomaly for a second just to take it in.
It is a lot to process.
The exact same Hebrew word used for a death sentence in a courtroom and for the human rights of a widow is also used for the physical blueprints of a tent and the way you habitually drink your morning coffee.
It covers all of it.
The sources mention Judges chapter 13, verse 12, which talks about the mishpeh hanar, the manner or the customary life of a teenager.
Samson specifically.
Right, Samson. How on earth does one single word cover the physical layout of a building the legal execution of a criminal, and the daily routine of a young person.
It sounds like 3 different dictionaries got mashed together.
It really does. What is the linguistic mechanism making that connection?
To understand the mechanism, you have to unpack the philosophical genius of the Hebrew language.
Okay, let's unpack it.
At its core, underneath the courtroom drama and the legal texts, mishpat means conformity to an authoritative standard.
Conformity to an authoritative standard.
That is the unifying thread running through all 425 uses of the word.
So when a building is constructed, precisely according to its architectural blueprint, conforming to the exact measurements given by the designer?
That building is in a state of mishpat.
Wow. And when a society operates according to its established customs and daily manners, conforming to the traditions of their ancestors.
That is their mispay.
And when a judge aligns a courtroom verdict with God's flawless moral law, conforming his earthly ruling to the heavenly standard.
That is mishpat. It is a comprehensive vision of total cosmic order.
It leaves absolutely nothing out.
Nothing. It envisions a reality where absolutely everything from the framing of a house to the ruling of a magistrate to the habits of a family to the care of the poor is precisely as it ought to be, perfectly aligned with the creator's specific design.
Looking back over the sheer volume of data we just covered, the progression is just staggering.
It is quite the climb.
This single word starts locally. It begins in the dirt of an ancient city gate, describing a lawsuit and a sentence between 2 neighbors.
Very grounded, very mundane.
Then, the biblical authors take that concept and expand it upwards to describe the perfect, flawless character of the judge of all the earth.
Lifting it to the divine level.
Right. From there, that perfect character codifies downward into divine law and permanent ordinances for the nation of Israel.
The standard is written down.
And those laws establish the rightful claims and protections for the poorest and most vulnerable in society, acting as a fortress against human depravity.
Providing a safety net for the weak.
And finally, that concept of proper order expands outward to define the structural blueprints of physical buildings and the daily habits and customs of a society.
It is the master key to how the biblical authors viewed reality as a unified whole.
In our modern era, we categorize our lives into isolated, airtight boxes.
We do. We separate our legal system from our religion, assuming the two should never mix.
We separate our physical architecture and city planning from our morality, treating buildings as neutral spaces.
We separate our daily, mundane habits from our theology, assuming God only cares about what we do on Sunday morning.
We treat all of these things as distinct, unrelated categories. But the ancient Hebrew mind used one single word, mishpat, for all of them.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy challenge today.
It does. What if you stopped viewing your daily routines, your professional duties, and your societal obligations as separate, secular categories?
What if there is no secular category?
Right. What if you instead started evaluating every single aspect of your life by whether it conforms to or rebels against the ultimate standard of God's design?